This was not just a war fought in trenches and under artillery fire. It was not only a conflict waged with bayonets and barbed wire. The First World War was also a large-scale financial war. A war fought in gold reserves, a war fought in bond markets, a war fought in central banks, and in the offices of financiers who never saw the front lines. On the battlefield, soldiers paid the price with their blood. But governments and bankers were calculating another cost. They were studying balance sheets, counting debts, and planning the future. The decisions made during those years did not only decide who won and who lost. They reshaped the global financial system itself, in ways we are still living with today. If you think war is only about politics and armies, stop and think again. The First World War proved one thing very clearly. Money is also a weapon, and perhaps one of the deadliest ever created. In 1914, Europe was already a powder keg. National rivalries, colonial ambitions, military alliances. The continent had become a fearful chessboard. But beneath all the talk of honor and empire lay a simple truth. A war on this scale was impossible without unimaginable amounts of money. The moment leaders chose war, they also chose debt. Every empire marching to the front was dragging its people into a long-term economic burden. At first, many believed the war would be short. Over by Christmas, they said. So they thought it could be funded the old way, with gold, limited borrowing, patriotic donations. That illusion collapsed within weeks. The war was burning money at a speed no one had expected. In 1914, Europe still lived under the gold standard. Paper money was promised to be exchangeable for real gold. This created trust, but it also imposed limits. Gold was finite. You could not print endlessly without losing credibility. Britain, France, and Germany all had strong reserves before the war. But once millions were mobilized and industry turned to weapons, costs exploded. Germany was soon spending over 10 million marks per day. Britain's costs reached millions of pounds daily. The math was merciless. Gold could not survive this pace. Governments faced a choice: slow the war, politically impossible, or change the rules of money. They chose the second option. One by one, the gold standard was suspended. This was not loudly announced, but it changed everything. Money was no longer backed by metal, but by trust in the state. For the first time, a total war was financed without a tangible anchor. Money detached from gold. Printing presses, credit, and persuasion took over. And governments learned something dangerous. Without gold constraints, they could borrow more, print more, spend more. Once that door opened, it never truly closed. Nowhere was this clearer than in Germany. Cut off from global capital and blockaded at sea, Germany turned inward. The state sold war bonds to its own people. The message was emotional and simple. While soldiers die, you must sacrifice. Teachers, clerks, shopkeepers, retirees handed over their savings. They were promised victory and repayment. On paper, it worked. In reality, it depended entirely on winning the war. When Germany lost, the system collapsed. Bonds became worthless, savings evaporated, and trust in the state shattered. This was not just an economic loss, it was psychological. Anger and resentment took root, with consequences that would echo for decades. Britain followed a different path. London was the world's financial heart. The pound was trusted, and Britain could borrow globally. When domestic funding proved insufficient, attention turned to the United States. Officially neutral, but financially involved. Washington might have stayed out of the fighting, but Wall Street did not. For American banks, neutrality did not mean distance. It meant opportunity. The war had created an enormous financial vacuum. Someone had to fill it, and American capital was ready. Banks in New York quickly realized that modern war was not only won with armies, but with credit lines, supply contracts, and control over cash flow. At the center of this system stood American banks, led by J.P. Morgan and Company. J.P. Morgan did not simply lend money. The firm became the financial coordinator of the Allied war effort. It arranged massive loans, it guaranteed purchases, it connected manufacturers, governments, and shipping networks. Weapons flowed across the Atlantic. Food shipments followed. Raw materials essential for industry and warfare moved through American contracts. This was not charity. It was leverage. Every loan tied Britain and France more tightly to American finance. Every shipment increased their dependence. Every contract shifted power quietly, invisibly, away from Europe. By the time the United States formally entered the war in 1917, the financial outcome had already been shaped. America did not enter the war as a desperate ally. It entered as the world's primary creditor. When the fighting ended, this distinction mattered. The battlefield winners were exhausted, but the banker had grown stronger. Gold flowed into the United States. European reserves drained away. And slowly, almost without announcement, global finance began to move, from London to Wall Street. France felt this shift immediately. Already weakened before the war, the country relied heavily on borrowing to survive. Its citizens were encouraged to buy government bonds, presented as both patriotic duty and safe investment. But domestic savings were never enough. American capital became essential, and with that capital came influence. Debt does not arrive without conditions. And financial dependence quietly narrowed France's political freedom after the war. Russia's situation was even more fragile. A weak banking system, limited industrial capacity, an economy unable to absorb the shock of total war. Inflation rose rapidly. The ruble lost value. Trust in money, and in the state, eroded. By 1917, economic collapse walked hand in hand with political revolution. History once again delivered a brutal rule. When money fails, political order follows. The final numbers of the war were unprecedented, figures the world had never seen before. The Allied powers spent more than $140 billion. The Central Powers around $60 billion. These sums dwarfed pre-war national incomes. No economy had been designed to absorb such destruction. The gold standard survived on paper, but in reality it was gone. Inflation spread across societies. Savings dissolved. In Germany, hyperinflation transformed daily life into chaos. Money lost meaning. People carried it in sacks. Wheelbarrows replaced wallets. Still, it was not enough. And as always, the burden fell on ordinary people, savers, wage earners, small investors, those who trusted money, those who played by the rules. The wealthy, meanwhile, often escaped. They moved assets abroad, bought real goods, converted information into protection. They understood something early. In financial wars, survival belongs to those closest to power and knowledge. The lesson was brutal and unmistakable. In financial wars, the small saver bleeds first. The First World War taught governments a lasting lesson. Money could be detached from reality. Debt could be normalized. Citizens could be persuaded. And all of it could be called temporary. That playbook never disappeared. The Great Depression, the stagflation of the 1970s, the global financial crisis of 2008. All of them trace their logic back to 1914. So when officials say the fundamentals are strong, remember, people heard that before. The true legacy of the war was not only destroyed cities or lost lives, it was a permanent shift in our relationship with money. Money became policy. Money became power. Money became a tool of control. When the guns fell silent, balance sheets told the real story. America held the gold. Europe held the debt. Germany was crushed by reparations. Britain returned to gold too early and paid the price. A fragile financial loop kept the system alive until it collapsed in 1929. That is why the First World War is not just military history. It is the foundation of modern financial history. It proved that governments can abandon anchors, inflate money, and accumulate debt, and still convince people it is necessary. Now look at today. When inflation is called temporary, when debt ceilings rise, when money is created with a keystroke, remember 1914. Gold was not abandoned by choice, but by desperation. Borrowing from the future to save the present has a long history. The same illusions remain, and the same people pay the price. The hidden financial war of the First World War is not over. It is the system we live in. And the lesson is simple. When money detaches from reality, it becomes a weapon. Real wealth is not numbers on a screen. It is knowledge, awareness, and the ability to see through illusions. History does not repeat itself, but it rhymes. You can visit the channel and subscribe for more.